Welcome, everybody who will be hopefully watching this webinar. We are going to give a quick introduction to the Aquaculture Challenge here today, and we should be done in about a half hour. But here's our kind of overview of our talk. We're going to do some quick introductions to a couple of us, and then we're going to cover what is aquaculture, kind of go over some of the different culture methods and organisms, and then we'll do a short little bit on why is aquaculture important, why does this topic really matter in today's day and age, and then we'll do a general overview of the different portions of the competition, as well as cover a little bit of what's in our team manual and rubrics and really point you in that direction to investigate it more yourself. And finally, we'll talk about what's due at the end of the competition and how you submit. And then after that, we do have a little bit about aquaculture opportunities here at Lake Superior State University. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Barbara Evans. She can introduce herself real quick.
Hi, yes, I'm Barbara Evans. I'm a professor of biology at Lake Superior State University. And I've been working to promote aquaculture and aquaponics, seeing that it really is a way to engage students in STEM education, that they seem to be naturally interested in aspects of aquaculture, and there's a lot of learning that is involved in getting yourself up to speed on many of the components of aquaculture. And I think the students have a lot of fun with it. We've definitely had some fun with it here. The idea for the challenge actually was introduced by some of my students that saw that some of these components were being used by growers, and we're also familiar with competitions like FIRST Robotics that really get students engaged in solving problems and learning a lot in the process. And so we've been working to see if we can do the same thing with aquaculture and educate another generation of young aquarists for aquaculture.
Thanks, Dr. Evans. And my name's Elliot Nelson. I am also based at Lake Superior State University. However, I work for an organization called Michigan Sea Grant. We're actually a program of MSU Extension and the University of Michigan, but we live around the state, and my office is based here at LSSU. We work to help promote the sustainable use of coastal resources and promote coastal economies. And one of the areas I work on is aquaculture, including workforce development and regulation guidelines and things like that. So when I found out about Dr. Evans' competition, I was super excited, and she invited me to come alongside and help work with the competition. So now we're in our fourth year. Also, throughout the competition, you might meet a few of our student liaisons. We have 3 different LSSU students that are students here at LSSU in a variety of our different programs, but they are volunteering to help with this competition as well, and they'll be reaching out to each of the teams. And hopefully at least twice during the competition, you can both meet. And so with that, I'm going to dive right into the competition here and give you a little bit of an update on some things. All right, so first I just would like to give an overview of what is aquaculture. I'm going to share this quick video from NOAA, which is actually a parent organization of Sea Grant, just to give us a quick intro. So there you have it. That's aquaculture in a nutshell. But to just kind of go over it again, aquaculture is the breeding and rearing and harvesting of fish, shellfish, plants, algae, and other organisms, all types of water environments. And so essentially, if you're growing something in the water purposefully, that is aquaculture. And there are a wide variety of organisms. Most people, when they think of aquaculture, tend to think about fish, because that is one of the most widely produced aquaculture products. But globally, it's actually not the most. We do have all sorts of different types of fish, everything from some local native species here in the Great Lakes, like yellow perch, to things like Atlantic salmon. And then there's also some tropical species like tilapia that are grown. That's one of the most widely grown fish species. But it's not just fish. Shellfish are another extremely widely grown product and extremely profitable and healthy product. Things like mussels and oysters are grown through aquaculture. And you also have things like shrimp, both in outdoor and indoor facilities, and a variety of species. And kind of newer to the scene, at least in the US, but globally quite common, is actually the growing of what they call sea greens, or what we typically think of as seaweed. A variety of different aquatic plants and algae that can be grown for human consumption and other purposes. They're quite popular, and it's actually one of the most widely grown aquaculture products in the world. So I'm going to cover really quick a few different types of aquaculture systems and just give you a quick overview. So one of the most longest used systems, and by the way, aquaculture has been around for thousands of years, while here in the US we think of it as a relatively new technology or new method of growing food. It's actually something that's been used for thousands of years, and cage culture is one of those methods. So cage culture is essentially growing aquatic organisms, typically finfish, in a cage in a natural outdoor setting or aquatic setting. Many of these are located in ocean settings. However, some are also located in large bodies of water and lakes. They're also sometimes found even in smaller ponds, or, for example, quarry ponds are a place where there's cage systems or net pen systems. This is one of the systems that does have some each of these systems have environmental benefits and economic benefits, and environmental drawbacks and economic drawbacks. This is one of the systems that has quite a bit of environmental risk when it comes to escape of the organisms, especially if they're non-native, that can lead to invasive species issues, disease transfer between wild organisms next to the cage, as well as difficulty with locking up the nutrients or fish waste. And so, for example, this is the Monterey Bay Aquarium's seafood rating guides, and salmon created or grown in aquaculture net pens is rated somewhat poorly. However, there are advancements in these systems that do sometimes make them environmentally sustainable if done correctly. This is a system in Lake Huron up in Canadian waters that grows Atlantic salmon, or rainbow trout, excuse me. But there's also new setups for experimental offshore systems that are much farther out, where the nutrients can be more diluted. And then there's also new experimental systems that utilize multi-trophic approaches, meaning that they grow fish in a cage alongside potentially other organisms like shellfish that can actually extract the nutrient waste from the fish, alongside, again, then maybe even sea greens, which can extract the inorganic waste from the fish, and possibly even crustaceans in the bottom. So by tiering these different growing systems next to each other, they may be able to reduce some of the pollution issues. But there are environmental risks with this method. Another type of aquaculture, which is the most common type of aquaculture in Michigan and in many states across the US, is flow-through facilities. The flow-through facilities are essentially where water from some sort of natural source, either a river or a stream, but also occasionally groundwater or the bottom of a pond, if it's being drained, can be a source as well. And the water flows through the system and then continuously flows out of the system, typically back into some sort of natural water body like a river, lake, or stream. And in this method, you can treat the water by diverting it through certain treatment ponds prior to releasing that water, which helps deal with some of the nutrient issues. Again, Monterey Bay Aquarium rates trout grown in flow-through systems fairly high in terms of environmental sustainability. These systems do have some risk, again, with invasive species transfer if non-native species are being grown, as well as potential for disease transfer. But the nutrients can be treated in these systems. A really innovative system example of this type of system is Indian Brooks Trout Farm down in Jackson, Michigan, or near Jackson, where the system actually utilizes groundwater to flow through, and it comes out right at the perfect temperature for growing rainbow trout, which is one of the main species they grow there. The system then is all gravity powered, so it reduces energy costs, and flows out through a natural wetland, or a man-made wetlands rather. So by discharging through a wetland, the water is actually cleaned and goes into the Grand River watershed cleaner than the vast majority of water that's running into there. So it's a unique system that creates wetland habitat, cleans the water well, utilizes low energy costs. Another example of a flow-through system is many of our state hatcheries, state and federal hatcheries. This is a sturgeon hatchery up in northern Michigan that utilizes flow-through water, and they raise a variety, or quite a few sturgeon to help restore lake sturgeon populations, which were greatly reduced through overfishing and overharvest. The third type of aquaculture is a pond system. This is pretty much your most basic type of aquaculture system. One of the lowest technology systems. It's simply a pond. Normally they are man-made ponds, at least here in Michigan, but they can be naturally occurring ponds as well, or dammed up rivers or streams. And most of the time these ponds have some sort of outlet in which they can be drained to harvest the organism being grown in there. Many of these ponds, this is an example of Wolf Creek Hatchery down in the southwest portion of Michigan. They have a variety of ponds that they grow out a variety of native species, which are then released into various Michigan water bodies to supplement for the recreational fishing opportunities. You can see there's a wide variety of ponds here, and these ponds tend to end up becoming natural pond ecosystems as they become seeded with different native wild organisms, algae, zooplankton, as well as your macroinvertebrates and crayfish. They become quite diverse ecosystems. There's not really a way to stop that, as the wild animals will land in there and bring those organisms in, particularly birds. And then that natural ecosystem helps to support the organisms that you're growing. Finally, we'll get to recirculating aquaculture. This really gets into the aquaculture challenge. Recirculating aquaculture is typically indoors, although it can be outdoors, and it's a system in which there's not a continuous feed, or at least a major continuous feed of new water into the system. Rather, the water in the system is run through a series of filters to clean it and then pumped right back into the tank in which you're growing the organism. In Michigan, we have actually a recirculating shrimp facility that grows warmer water shrimp. And we have a couple of other facilities, including there's a eel facility that's under development right now. So there's a lot of different things you can grow in these facilities. But again, they are higher energy costs, and they tend to be more expensive to set up because you need a variety of filters to clean that water before you pump it in. And you will have to add some water on a daily basis because of it lost through evaporation. But these systems are lower environmental risk because they are closed off from any sort of natural water body, and they can even be indoor. Finally, we'll get to aquaponics, which is where this challenge comes in. So aquaponics is a recirculating aquaculture system that adds in hydroponics, or the growing of plants in a substrate that is not soil. Typically, the plants in aquaponic systems are grown on some sort of floating raft. And essentially the water from the fish tank or other aquatic organism tank is pumped through a series of filters, but these filters don't actually extract the nutrients out of the water. What they do is they allow for microbes to change the nutrients from one form to another that is usable by plants. The water then goes from that microbial portion to plants, where the plants can take up the nutrients out of the water. The water can then essentially be returned back to the fish, cleaned up by the microbes in the plants. This really helps reduce the need for extensive filter systems and having to change those on such a regular basis. And it's much more of a zero waste kind of option. It's a really unique system, and it brings a lot of awesome opportunities for doing low waste and sustainable systems. However, it has its challenges. These systems are complex. They don't just involve an aquatic organism. Now they involve a terrestrial plant and a series of microbes that need to be grown. But they are really, really fun. And that's why we have decided to create this challenge around aquaponics systems. So this is the type of system that you'll be growing for the challenge. Here's an example of a system in Michigan. You can see they're growing tilapia, which is the most commonly grown species in an aquaponics system. In the Midwest, that does mean you need to heat your buildings because tilapia are a tropical species. They can't handle cold water, but they are very hardy and very tolerant. And their waste goes through a series of microbial systems in which the nutrients are changed, and then out to, in this case, there's floating rafts. Underneath is the water from the fish tank and lettuce growing on top. But you can also use things like these clay balls in which water can trickle through these. So just really quick, that's our different types of aquaculture systems and a very quick overview of aquaponics. But in all these systems, you have to consider what your organisms need to grow and what is in the water that might harm them or stop them from growing. So this is really basic, but your inputs have to be food. So this will be one thing you need to consider. What type of food, where are you going to get it? The organism you have, what are its nutritional requirements to keep it growing healthy and strong? You then also have to have oxygen. Yes, this is in the water, and there is needs to be oxygen in your water, and so you'll have to consider some sort of system to help aerate your water and get oxygen into it on a regular basis. You also need clean water, which is to do with what you want to start with. For example, water with chlorine in it in a city water system is not going to be very good for your aquaponic system because chlorine will most likely harm your organisms. However, it's not too hard to get chlorine out of water. There's a variety of methods, or you can just let it evaporate over a certain period of time. But you do need to start with and maintain clean water. And while this isn't really an input, you do have to consider space for your organisms. There are certain space requirements, and overcrowding can lead to disease or stress of your organisms. The outputs that come out, you have carbon dioxide and you have animal waste. And these two outputs from your organisms need to be removed. And again, this is where both aeration and where the microbial setup you have, microbial filters, can help transfer your nutrients to a form that can be taken out by plants. So why does this matter? Why is aquaculture important to consider? Well, globally, seafood is expected to become more and more in demand. In fact, already seafood is on the rise in terms of consumption globally. We have a growing population in this world, and that population needs to be fed. And one of those forms of food that people like to seek is seafood. However, global stocks of wild-caught seafood are basically maxed out. We are fishing the oceans at maximum capacity, or in some cases, overfishing. And our inland lakes as well are pretty much all tapped out to maximum capacity. If you look at this chart here, the lower bar is the amount of global seafood that's caught in wild fisheries. And when you think about it, it's quite amazing that we still even have a global wild-caught food source. We don't really go out and hunt for most of our meat nowadays. We don't really go out and wild forage for most of our crops nowadays. Everything we do terrestrially that we eat, that you can buy in a grocery store, is something that's farmed. But fish is one of the few things that is not farmed in a lot of cases. It's actually gone out and wild caught. And there's a lot of great benefits to wild caught fisheries, but again, they are mostly maxed out. And so we're not going to get much more from wild fisheries or other types of seafood. However, aquaculture has a lot of opportunity to continue to grow. And as of 2011, over half of the seafood products consumed in the world now come from aquaculture. By 2025, that's expected to be 73%. Over the next few years, there's expected to be a 20% rise in demand for seafood products in North America. And in China, there's expected, and other Asian countries, there's expected to be a 50% rise. The point is, we can't catch much more seafood. We're pretty much maxed out there, but there's more and more seafood demand. What's really interesting, though, is that the US is really behind in terms of aquaculture production. Currently, the US has a $12 to $14 billion seafood trade deficit. That means that we buy 12 to 14 more billion dollars of seafood products from overseas than we ship out or sell. And so this creates an economic issue, as this is our second largest economic or natural resource trade deficit after oil and natural gas. And even though we think of the Great Lakes region as being rich in seafood products, which it is, we still import over 90% of our seafood products. The vast majority of what you can buy in a grocery store, which is where a lot of people get their seafood from, is an imported product from out of the country. So we have both an economic incentive and some environmental incentive to think about how can we increase our seafood supply locally, and one of those methods is aquaculture. Another unique aspect of aquaculture is that it can be done in a highly resource efficient way that has very low environmental impact. As I said before, there are environmental risks with aquaculture, just as there are with growing any other form of animal protein. It has to be done in an appropriate and sustainable way, but when done appropriately, it can have very low impact. And one of the most amazing things about seafood products is that they can have very high energy efficiency. That means the amount of feed you give them versus the amount of meat that you get out is really high. It's actually higher than pretty much any other animal product or animal protein that you can grow. Okay, so that's a little bit of a case for what aquaculture is and why it might be important for us to think about it moving forward. Now we're going to dive into some of the specifics about the aquaculture challenge itself. And I'm pretty excited that we have a number of teams this year that are new, so hopefully this information is helpful to you. And I'll reference our team manual as well as our team liaisons, which can be a great resource for you throughout the competition. So the Aquaculture Challenge is made up of 3 parts, and as I'll cover later, your team does not necessarily have to complete all 3 parts of these, although all teams are highly encouraged to. So I'll go through each one of them individually. The first thing is building an aquaponics system. And so as part of this competition, you aren't just thinking theoretically about an aquaponics system. We want you to actually build a real physical aquaponics system in your classroom or in your after-school location that you have set aside for this competition. And there are not a lot of restrictions about what you can and can't incorporate. We really want to see creativity in these aquaponics designs, sustainability, both environmental and economic considered, and we really just want to see what you can come up with. Now, this portion of the competition, the building of the system, we do not provide the supplies, but you can create an aquaponics system at quite a low cost. Our team manual provides a little bit of input into that, but you can reuse any materials you have lying around. Typically, though, these systems require at least some sort of tank. It can be a clear aquarium, but it can also be a variety of types of plastic tanks that are used. And then it requires quite a bit of piping. Typically, PVC piping is what most teams end up using, although you're not restricted to that. And then it requires some sort of hydroponics growing system. This can be just simply a floating mat on top of water or any other sort of substrate that is not soil that you can grow a terrestrial plant in. So again, to be an aquaponics system considered for this, it has to have some sort of organism that's grown in an aquatic environment and some sort of terrestrial plant that's not grown in soil. Those are really your 2 basic requirements. And then there are a few other minor rules, such as if you're growing something that's going to be consumed, it needs to be grown in non-toxic settings. So just be aware of the glues you use and the type of tanks you use and what chemicals could leach out of them. And then when it comes to organisms, don't use anything that's going to be invasive. There is a list of invasive species that is provided in the team manual for Michigan, and most other states have their own list of invasive species. And so you can look that up and you can not use those organisms. You can buy organisms through a variety of sources. We encourage using certified disease-free organisms. If you are thinking that you want to wild harvest your organisms, just be very cautious that most states require some sort of permit before you wild harvest any sort of aquatic organism. So be very cautious if that's the route you're planning to take. But the type of organism that's grown is completely up to you. It does not have to be a fish, although that's what many teams use. And then the terrestrial or plants that are grown as well, is as creative as you want to be. But again, think about, is this going to be environmentally sustainable? What are the input requirements going to be? What are the risks with those species? And then is it going to be economically sustainable? Could this scale up and be a real business model, which ties into part 3 we'll get to in a second. Okay, so also on here is a little encouragement to really think through a design cycle with your aquaponics system. Really do some investigation, look into some of the ideas, have a brainstorming session, come up with the organisms you want to grow, the size of your system, that you're thinking you might have the resources to do. Then plan that out by creating an actual blueprint. And you might then want to start creating. And after you create it, evaluate, see, is this working? Is it leaking? Are there issues with our design? Is the water flowing through appropriately? And all of these points, you may need to go back to planning or back to investigating. And at each of these points, we encourage you to kind of work your way through this design cycle. That might also mean, if you get started early enough, that you have a few iterations of your aquaponics system. We've had some really successful teams that have actually created multiple systems and then sort of went with the one that worked the best, or some teams that built a system, took it apart, built it, took it apart. This is all part of the engineering and design process that we're really excited for each of the teams to have. And so we encourage you to start as early as you can with this part of the plan or with this part of the program, and to really dive into the creation through this iterative design process. All right, so you built your system. That's going to happen hopefully over the month of February, maybe into March. Hopefully by mid-March or early March, you have a system that's up and running. At this point, it's time to start monitoring your system. This is the second portion of the Aquaponics Challenge. And in this part, we actually do provide you some monitoring equipment. And so we will provide you a water chemistry kit, which uses basically some basic hand monitoring systems that you'll have to mix some chemicals and shake up and use some color codes to see. It's a pretty basic water quality monitoring kit. So you use that to monitor your water quality, make sure it's appropriate for your organisms growing in that water. But we also are providing you with some automated probes. And these probes you can actually program with an Arduino control board we're sending. And you can then use computer code to actually instruct these probes to take measurements at certain times. Now, we'll get to the rubric later, but we're really encouraging teams to get really creative with this portion and to actually use their probes in a way that could potentially even automatically change the system if certain conditions change outside of their optimal range. This is probably the most challenging aspect for a lot of teams because it involves some pretty technical computer programming, but we do provide you a nice guide, and there is quite a bit of pre-written code out there that you can take and then tweak and change around as you need. We've had teams that connect these probes to cell phone apps so they can get real-time updates about their system. We've had some teams that have added additional probes onto this, and we even encourage teams to find ways to have their probes connect to something that could automatically change the system. For example, if you get outside of your optimal temperature range, perhaps you could connect it to some sort of heater or chiller that might change the water temperature if you automatically get out of your temperature range that you need. So there's a lot you can do with this. We'll note too that while we offer Arduino boards and probes, you don't have to necessarily use those. You can use your own microcontroller boards. We have some teams that are familiar with Raspberry Pi boards and would prefer to use those since they're familiar with them. That's totally acceptable. And you can add additional probes if you want. Again, looking back to the rubric, it might not necessarily help your team score. We would do not requiring you to purchase additional expensive equipment, but we do encourage you to be creative and work with the resources you have. Finally, this is something that is important as well, is to monitor your organism's growth. Hopefully you'll have a few weeks of your system up and running, and you can use a variety of methods to see how well things are growing in your system. All right, the third portion of the challenge is to sustain and expand your system, aka create a business plan. So we want to tie these into real world systems, right? It's really cool to create something really interesting and intricate, but the question is, could this really be a real sustainable business model that you could utilize? So we're encouraging teams to use Canvanizer.com to create a standard business plan that takes you through a variety of things. You can think about where your funding might come from, the resources you need, how much your equipment's going to cost, how much it would cost to scale it up. Also think about who your customers would be and what sort of products you're selling. Of course, it makes sense that most teams would want to sell the products they're growing, but there are other options too. You might actually be trying to sell your system itself to other growers, potential growers, or you might be offering training. We've had some really creative ideas about what the actual product could be from these systems. It doesn't have to be just the organisms that you're growing. Well, if it is just that, that's completely acceptable too. And then besides the business plan, you'll create a business pitch, which you'll deliver through a short presentation. So for more information on each of these portions and to really see how each of these portions are scored, we encourage each team to make sure to check out the team manual and the rubrics. The team manual is located online, and it's been emailed, the link to it, to each of you. It includes an overview of the components of the challenge, as well as a few of the restrictions we place, such as the invasive species restrictions. It gives you guidelines for how large of a team size we encourage. It also details the requirements for coaches and things like that. So we really encourage you to read it through thoroughly. Finally, it outlines the submission requirements and rubrics. I'm about to go over the submission requirements, but again, they are in the team manual so that when it comes to the end of the competition, you know exactly what you need to submit before the deadline in April. Here is an example of one of our rubrics. So they're pretty general, but again, we do encourage you to read them to make sure that you're focused on creating the correct portions. And again, you do not have to complete all 3 portions of the challenge. If you have a team that's just really interested in the business aspect, maybe you just model up a blueprint of what the system would be and then just run with the business portion. We have awards for each of the 3 portions individually. So we have a Tech Savvy Award for the monitoring portion. We have a Creative and Builders Award, and we also have the Business Award. There is, however, a cumulative award, so we do encourage teams to submit all 3 portions, even if they're only partially completed. For example, if you only get water quality monitoring and organism monitoring, but you never get the probes hooked up, still submit that, because your cumulative score goes into a cumulative award that you may be able to win. So regardless of how far you get, we really encourage submitting as much as you possibly can. And it will also help you for future years as you hopefully continue with the competition and try to submit all 3 portions in future years. So yeah, I just covered that. Sorry about that. Not having the slide there, but again, we encourage you to submit all 3 portions, not a requirement. So here is an overview of what you need to submit by the end of the competition. Each of these portions are submitted through a video that highlights the work you've done. We've switched everything to electronic submission so that no teams have to try to get all the way from Wisconsin or wherever they are to Lake Superior State University, from all the way down in the Detroit area, for example. It's a long drive, we get that. You don't have to come in person here to submit to try to get an award. What you do have to do is take short videos of each portion. So for the first part, for creating a system, you need to record a short 3 5-minute video describing your system. Videos should not exceed 5 minutes. The video should take us through the process of building your system. That doesn't mean that you have to keep videos the whole time. Just when you're done, tell us what happened. Did you build a couple systems? Did you build one? How did you design it? Did you sketch it out first? Did you use detailed blueprints? What was the creative process that went in, and the engineering process that went into building the system, including some of the successes and challenges? Then we want to know what the materials and non-living components of your system were that were used. So you can then take your camera, show us those on your system, and tell us a little bit about them. Next, we want to know about the organisms. Again, you can take the camera and show us a bit about the organisms. And then the dimensions of your system. Just give us a quick overview of the size of it. Finally, wrap up the video by giving a quick rundown of the costs. Oh, and weight of the plants and animals that can be grown in your system and how long it would take to harvest. Apologies, I'm forgetting a few of these portions here. Right, so at the end of the video, after you talk about the actual system, talk about the organisms that were grown in there, specifically how well they grew, how large or how much growth rate you had over the course, and then any maintenance that was needed. So this video does not need to be produced well. You can take it with a cell phone. We just need to clearly be able to hear and see what you're doing in the video. So again, you don't need to worry about editing. There are no additional points for an edited video that utilizes any sort of effects. There's no problem if you do that. It's certainly fine, but it's not going to get you any additional points on the rubrics. Along with the video about your system, you need to submit a few things, including blueprints or pictures of your system that show all the components labeled and the dimensions. And we like those submitted as a PDF. So you'll need a blueprint, and then you'll need a video that covers a number of things. Same thing for the monitoring part. Again, a video that describes how you utilize the Arduino system, as well as your chemical and biological monitoring, what it was that you monitored, how often you monitored, water chemistry and abiotic variables, biotic variables, and how automated your system was, if it was automated, how often things were monitored using the programming, and how that was documented. Along with the video for this portion, you'll also need to submit a record of your monitoring. And so that includes your chemical monitoring, as well as your code that you potentially wrote or that you utilize for your Arduino boards. And you'll submit those as a PDF. If you look at the rubric, there's additional points given for how you display those records. Utilizing graphs or charts is very helpful. So look at the rubric closely for that. But there is additional materials that go along with your monitoring submission. The final thing you'll need to submit is your business plan. So again, this is done as a video and is done as a business pitch. For the business portion, then, you would give an overview of your business model, your assumptions, your products, your market, your projected costs and projected income, if this were to be a business, and then a little bit of research or validation. How do you know that market exists? How do you know you can get the price that you're expecting for your product? Action steps required to initiate the model. So what would have to happen to really see this system turn into an actual business? And then finally, you'll need your Canvanizer business model, which again, you can create on canvanizer.com, and you simply download that as a PDF and submit it. And so the business section, again, it's just a business pitch, and then the PDF from canvanizer.com. So those are the three portions of the competition and the three different sort of groups of things that you will need to submit at the end of the competition. The website will share again with you that has the folders for uploading. They're not up there yet, but there'll be a folder to upload all these things, both your videos and the supporting materials for each three parts. Again, as a reminder, we encourage teams to submit as much as they can, even if they don't, for example, make a video, they could still submit the materials. Even if they can't submit all three parts, submit as much as you can. So I'm gonna have a Q&A session here in a little bit. We're almost to the end of our time, but really quickly before we do that, I do wanna give a quick shout out to some of the engaging opportunities for aquaculture here at Lake Superior State University and why this university is housing this challenge. I will say, although the award ceremony is broadcast online, we will have an option for teams to attend the award ceremony in person. we really encourage this because not only will you get to be here for the award ceremony in person, but we'll have an opportunity to take you around to some aquaculture facilities here on campus and potentially even some off campus, depending on how many teams we have and how long they can come for. But we have a really interesting setup here at Lake Superior State University called the Center for Freshwater Research and Education. And part of that center is an actual Atlantic salmon fish hatchery. It's a flow-through hatchery, and it takes students from the university in our fisheries and wildlife program and a few other programs, and has them actually growing Atlantic salmon that are eventually released after about a year and a half into the St. Mary's River. This has happened for over 30 years and has created a brand new fishery in this area for Atlantic salmon. It's a really highly prized fish, and a lot of people are out there now fishing for it because of the work here at LSSU. And it's pretty neat too, because it's actually a partnership with our Department of Natural Resources in Michigan. And so with the Michigan DNR and with Lake Superior State University, there's a new hatchery here. But again, the goal of the hatchery is to get Lake Superior State University students experience in aquaculture. And you can see this is a mature Atlantic salmon. They actually harvest them at a certain point of the year and get the eggs and seed out, and then they fertilize the eggs and they grow them all the way out till they're about this big or so and release them into the river. It's a really unique system. It's flow through, and actually they release them right out of the system, shoots right down into the river. So it's really unique and one of the most successful fishery stories, I think, in Michigan. So if you come to LSSU on the challenge competition or challenge award ceremony day, we'll give you a tour of the ARL and talk about some of the opportunities for learning here. One of the other great projects here at Lake Superior State University is Superior Aquasystems. Superior Aquasystems was something started by Dr. Evans and a number of Lake Superior State University students, where they had the goal of trying to create an aquaponics learning facility, but not just one that you can learn about, but one that could actually create real businesses and real business models. So Superior Aquasystems is actually its own LLC, and the goal of the company is to help create innovative aquaponics systems that use sustainable energy sources and could be real models for how to run an aquaponics business. So there's a greenhouse on campus, a hoop house, and in that is a variety of systems that can be hooked up and run together to grow a variety of organisms. This was one of the first designs that the students created, and it was, as you can see, a gravity-fed approach that used a number of different tiered systems. There's a very large tank in the back. But the cool thing about this Superior Aquasystems is that it doesn't look like this anymore. There's a new group of students in, and they're redesigning it with a whole bunch of creative ideas, utilizing, thinking about using growing bait fish or crayfish, or even right now they're working on growing some terrestrial worms as bait worms and utilizing the aquaponics system to help that. So there's a lot of potential if you come here to see a totally different setup each time. The whole goal is that they're creating new systems and they're using a variety of innovative techniques. Here we can see a much bigger version of the Arduino control boards that we send you, and this control board can automatically monitor a number of things in the Superior Aquasystems setup. There's also things like they have an egg tank in there and trying to think about innovative ways to utilize those to grow terrestrial plants, as well as things like solar water heaters and solar panels to help provide the electricity, because in aquaponics, the electrical costs and heating costs are some of the most prohibitive things for most businesses, because it costs a lot more to upkeep an aquaponics facility than it does, say, an outdoor raceway. And so finding creative ways to use sustainable energy sources is a big part of what Superior Aquasystems does. So those are just a couple of examples of aquaculture here at Lake Superior State University, why we're involved and interested in this. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. If you have a question, you can either submit it through the chat function at the bottom of your screen, or you can unmute yourself. Again, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a small microphone. You can click that and it will unmute you, and I'll take questions. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded, and we'll share this recording with all the teams. So with that, I'll open it to any questions or let Dr. Evans chime in if she has anything else to add. Well, I'm not hearing any questions right now. So I think I'll probably stop this recording. And again, I will share this with all the teams, and hopefully as a helpful introduction and overview to the competition. We're really excited. We have quite a few teams this year from a variety of places, including Wisconsin, the lower peninsula of Michigan, upper peninsula of Michigan. So we're excited to see what you come up with. And again, just as a reminder, team liaisons will be reaching out to each team. These are Lake Superior State University students that are familiar with the competition. They're there to be your point of contact to help you. So they'll be reaching out to you to try to set up one-on-one meetings or one-on-team meetings where they can chat with you or your team members, help you think through the process. They also have a sample calendar that has some deadlines to help you think through when you might want to have each different portion completed. They'll work with you to help get you your Arduino control boards and chemistry kits. So again, look for those emails from your team liaisons and please respond to them so that we can get some of those conversations going. All right, well, good luck this year and have a lot of fun on the competition.